You didn't fall in love with them. You fell in love with the hope that this person could finally fix the part of you that has always felt broken. There is an ache that lives just beneath the floorboards of the soul. It is not loud or demanding. It is a quiet hum of incompletion, a silent draft you feel in every empty room. It is the ghost in the machine of you, the persistent, lifelong feeling that you are a puzzle with a crucial piece missing. You have spent your life looking for that piece, not under the couch cushions or in old boxes, but in the eyes of other people. You were not searching for love. You were searching for a mirror, a reflection that would finally show you an image of yourself as whole, as seen, as finally belonging somewhere. This is the starting point of a heartbreak that was written long before you ever met them. This is the unconscious blueprint for why we seek love in all the wrong places. You must first understand this universal human cry for connection. It is, as some have said, a primal need to be seen and accepted in our entirety. It is a vulnerability so deep that when we feel fundamentally fractured inside, we will offer the shards of ourselves to the first person who shows even a glimmer of recognition. You did this without realizing it. You handed over your broken pieces, not out of trust, but in a desperate, silent plea. Can you put me back together? This was never a negotiation between two equals. It was a surrender. You were not choosing a partner to build a life with. You were unconsciously trying to outsource the repair of your own soul, hoping another person could do for you what you felt incapable of doing for yourself. This search is almost never a conscious one. The psychoanalyst Carl Jung taught that we are drawn, by an invisible, magnetic force, to people who carry the parts of ourselves we have rejected, our forgotten strengths, our disowned sadness, our repressed anger. We call this our shadow. The powerful pull you felt toward them, the one that felt like fate or destiny, was not a sign of a healthy union. It was your soul's desperate, misguided attempt to become whole again, not by doing the difficult internal work, but by merging with its missing pieces as they existed in someone else. You felt that magnetic attraction because you unconsciously recognized a lost part of your own story in them. You were not falling in love with a person. You were trying to reclaim a piece of yourself, not from within, but by possessing it in them. Do you remember how it felt in the beginning? That immediate, almost unnerving recognition. It was as if a switch had been flipped inside of you, and a low hum of anxiety you didn't even know was there had suddenly gone quiet. You looked at them and you felt a sense of arrival. You called it a spark, an instant connection, the feeling of being home. For the first time in a long time, you felt you could finally exhale, that you didn't have to perform or pretend. The world, which had always felt loud and chaotic, suddenly seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the two of you in a pocket of profound silence. You believed you had found your other half, the one person who finally understood the unspoken language of your heart. But that intensity was not intimacy. It was an echo. The connection felt so deep not because their soul was resonating with yours, but because you had finally found a space empty enough to hear your own longing perfectly reflected back at you. Think of them as a vast, empty room. When you whispered your hopes, the words came back to you, sounding like a promise. When you spoke of your loneliness, the sound returned as empathy. You weren't having a dialogue. You were engaged in a monologue with yourself, and they were simply the walls that gave your voice dimension. You mistook that resonance for a shared song, but you were the only one singing. You were a lonely voice in a quiet hall, falling deeply in love with the sound of your own unmet needs. You weren't connecting with them. You were finally meeting your own desperation face to face, and in the shock of that meeting, you called it love. If the connection you felt was just an echo, then who was the person you were spending all that time with? Who was the person whose approval you craved, whose calls you waited for, whose touch felt like a form of salvation? The hardest truth to accept is that you did not really see them. You saw a screen where a person was supposed to be, and on that screen you played a film that only you were watching, a story written by the oldest and most wounded part of you. This is what the psychologist Carl Jung called projection. You didn't fall in love with them, You fell in love with the role you desperately needed them to play. You cast them without an audition. You handed them a script they never read. In this silent film playing inside your head, they were the star. Perhaps they were the savior, the one strong enough to rescue you from the quiet panic of your own life. Or maybe they were the parent, the one who would finally offer the unconditional approval you never received as a child, the one who would make you feel chosen at last. They were the healer who would know exactly where your wounds were and how to soothe them without you ever having to speak of the pain. You dressed this person in the costume of your hope, wrote their lines with your deepest needs, and lit them with the glow of your own projected light. You fell in love with a character, a beautiful, perfect ghost, and when they inevitably broke character, when their own humanity, their own flaws, their own selfishness surfaced, you felt an immense sense of betrayal. But they did not betray you. They simply stopped playing a part they never knew they had. The illusion collapsed, and the heartbreak you felt was the projector shutting down, leaving you alone in the dark, watching the credits roll on a movie that was never real. You were left haunted by memories, not of them, but of the fantasy you had built. A person who feels whole within themselves would have felt their distance and walked away. Their indifference would have been a clear signal, a quiet and respectable ending. But for you, it was not an ending. It was a challenge. Their emotional unavailability did not extinguish your hope. It became the very fuel that your hope burned on. It pulled you into the lethal, exhausting orbit of the almost relationship. You were not living in the reality of their actions. You were living in the potential of their words, in the echo of a single good day that you stretched over weeks of silence. Every unanswered text, every canceled plan, every vague promise was not a sign to let go, but an invitation to try harder, to be better, to finally solve the puzzle of their heart. This is the psychological hook that creates an addiction. You were not addicted to them as a person. You were addicted to the brutal cycle of hope and despair. It's a mechanism known as intermittent reinforcement. For days, you would be left in the cold, starving for a sign of recognition, feeling invisible and worthless. Then, just as you were about to give up, a crumb would appear. A late-night message, a brief moment of warmth, a shared laugh that felt like the sun breaking through the clouds. That small reward would trigger a flood of relief in your system, powerful enough to erase all the preceding pain. It was a gambler's high. You weren't fighting for a relationship. You were sitting at a slot machine, pulling the lever again and again, addicted to the possibility that this time you would finally win. The prize was not their love. The prize was the momentary validation that you were, in fact, worthy of being chosen. Their silence hurt more than shouting ever could, because in the silence, the game was still on. You could still hope, and that hope was both your comfort and your cage. Beneath the frantic energy of trying to win their approval was a quieter, more secret hope. You told yourself and maybe others that you were strong, that you were independent, that you didn't need anyone. But in the most honest, hidden corners of your heart, you hoped they would rescue you. You longed for someone to arrive and finally pull you from the cold, quiet waters of your own loneliness, to build a dam against the emptiness you felt creeping in at the edges of every day. You saw in them not a partner, but a savior. And this is the paradox that guaranteed the relationship's failure before it even began. True love, the kind that lasts, is a partnership between two whole individuals. It is not a transaction between a patient and a medic. By seeking a savior, you ensured you could never be their equal. You placed them on a pedestal and then wondered why you always felt so small standing beneath them. The dynamic you created was a contradiction. You wanted them to rescue you, but a drowning person cannot be saved by someone they are unintentionally pulling underwater. Imagine yourself struggling in a deep ocean of need. You see them and you believe they are the lifeboat. You grab on with all your strength, but your grip, born of desperation, becomes an anchor. You don't realize that they are treading water too, struggling with their own currents, their own depths. They cannot save you, because the weight of your expectation is immense. You are both being pulled down by the same tragic hope. You weren't asking for love. You were asking for a miracle from someone who was just as lost as you were. You were addicted to being needed by them, but what you were truly starving for was the feeling of being rescued. In asking them to be your savior, you cemented your own role as the one who is forever lost. And then, inevitably, there comes a moment of horrifying clarity. It is not a gentle awakening, like the slow rise of the sun. It is a violent shattering, like a mirror dropped on a stone floor. The film playing in your head rips and burns. The screen flickers and dies. The character you created, the one you dressed in the costume of a savior, turns and walks off the set, leaving you alone in the theater. The fantasy collapses, and you are left standing in the rubble of what you thought was real. This is the moment you realize the oasis you were crawling towards across a desert of loneliness was a mirage. You arrive, parched and broken, only to find nothing but sand. They hold no water. They never did. The crushing emptiness that floods your system in their absence isn't new. It is the original void, the one you were trying to escape all along. But it feels more vast, more barren than before, because now it is amplified by the ghost of the hope you held. The silence is heavier now that you know for certain no answer is coming. The pain is not just from their absence. It's from the brutal understanding that the healing you were so sure they possessed was an illusion. They do not have the answers. They do not have the cure. They do not have the love you imagined. They are just another person, as thirsty and lost as you are. The devastation you feel is the mourning for a future that was never going to happen. You realize you weren't just left behind by them. You were left behind by your own hope, stranded in the stark and silent landscape of reality. When the mirage collapses, the pain that remains is sharp and specific. Think about the things they did that cut you the deepest. It was not random cruelty. It was precise. It was the casual criticism that landed with the weight of a final judgment. It was the profound indifference they showed when you were most vulnerable, making you feel completely and utterly invisible. It was the final act of abandonment, the way they left without explanation, confirming your oldest and most terrifying fear, that you are, in the end, disposable. These actions hurt so intensely for a reason. They were not new wounds. They were echoes of a conversation you have been having with yourself for a lifetime. Their criticism sounded so convincing because it spoke with the exact same voice as your own inner critic. Their dismissal of your value felt so true because it confirmed what you already secretly believed to be true about yourself. This is what it means to meet your own shadow in another person. Carl Jung would say that you were not just encountering their flaws. You were being forced to confront the parts of yourself that you have disowned and rejected. They became a living, breathing mirror for your own self-loathing. Their inability to see your worth was a perfect reflection of your own inability to see it. Their final, silent departure was an external dramatization of how you have learned to abandon yourself over and over again. You were not just being hurt by them. You were being wounded by the reflection of your own hidden shame. The pain was so piercing because they didn't have to invent a weapon to hurt you. They simply found the dagger you had already placed in your own back, and they pushed. They gave your deepest fears a face and a voice, and in doing so, they made your internal hell an external reality. If the relationship was a mirror for your deepest self-rejection, a constant cycle of addictive pain, the logical question is, why did you stay so long? Why do you still feel its pull even now? The answer is not found in logic, but in the strange comfort of a familiar wound. The endless loop of hope and disappointment, the anxiety of waiting for a message, the brief highs and the crushing lows, all of it, while agonizing, was predictable. It was a pain you knew how to survive. This relationship was a golden cage. From the outside, it may have shimmered with the promise of love and connection, but on the inside, it was a prison that kept you small. Yet, it was a prison you chose to remain in because it protected you from a much greater and more profound terror. The absolute unknown freedom of being alone with your original wound. To leave the cage is to do more than just leave them. It is to step out into a vast, silent, an empty landscape where there is nothing to distract you from yourself. There is no one to blame for your pain, no phone to check for validation, no dramatic reunion to fantasize about. There is only you and the quiet, cavernous emptiness you have been running from your entire life. The pain of the relationship, in a strange way, was a buffer against this deeper existential dread. It gave your anxiety a name and a face. It was safer to feel the familiar ache of being let down by them than to face the terrifying possibility that the ache was inside you all along. Choosing to stay in the loop was a form of emotional paralysis. You were not choosing them over your own happiness. You were choosing the known pain of the cage over the terrifying, uncertain freedom of finally having to heal yourself. It is easy to look back on this entire, agonizing experience and see it as a mistake. A catastrophic waste of your time, your energy, and your heart. You see the wreckage and believe it is evidence of your failure. But what if it was not a mistake at all? What if it was a symptom, a fever dream your soul had to create to show you where the real infection lies? In the ancient, mystical practice of alchemy, it was believed that lead could be transformed into gold through a process of intense heat and unrelenting pressure. This relationship was the alchemical fire. The unbearable heat of the anxiety, the crushing pressure of the disappointment, it was all part of a sacred and violent process designed not to destroy you, but to burn away everything that was not real. The purpose of this fire was never to permanently fuse you with them. It was to incinerate the fantasy that another person could ever be your salvation. It was designed to break your heart so completely that it would have no choice but to break open, forcing you to finally turn your gaze away from the external world and toward the only source of healing that has ever existed, the world within you. The pain you feel is not the end of the story. It is a compass. For so long, that compass needle was pointing at them, swinging wildly between the north of their approval and the south of their rejection. But its true function was always to point inward. The ache is a signal, a persistent light on the dashboard of your soul, telling you to stop looking at the road and finally check your own engine. This whole experience was a severe mercy, a painful but necessary intervention from your own psyche to get you to come home to yourself. The final step in this harrowing journey, once the fire has subsided and the compass is pointing steadily inward, is an act of sacred reclamation. It begins with a simple but profound question. What was it that you so admired in them? Take a moment and think about it. Was it their confidence, the way they seemed to move through the world without apology? Was it their creativity, their freedom, their wildness? Was it the light they seemed to carry, a light that made you feel safe and warm? List these qualities in your mind. See them clearly. And now hear this truth. That was never theirs. It was yours. All of it. Those incredible qualities you saw in them were the disowned and dormant treasures of your own soul. They were the gold buried in your own backyard that you mistook for common stone. Because you did not feel worthy of owning such light, such strength, such freedom, you projected it onto them. You gave away your most precious assets for free, and then you stood back and worshipped them for being so rich, all the while feeling impoverished yourself. You fell in love with a reflection of your own highest potential. The final stage of this journey, therefore, is not about forgetting them or even forgiving them. It is about consciously retracting that projection. It is the act of looking at the memory of them and saying, "Thank you for showing me what I was missing in myself." It is the work of taking back the gold you so freely gave away. You must see that the strength you admired was your own sleeping courage. The freedom you envied was your own repressed spirit. The light you were drawn to was a spark of your own divinity, reflected back at you. You didn't miss them. You missed the illusion of wholeness they seemed to offer. By reclaiming your projections, you stop needing another person to be your mirror, and you finally begin to see the gold as your own. This relentless, painful search for love in all the wrong places was never a sign of your failure or a measure of your worthlessness. It was a profound, unavoidable, and necessary call from the deepest part of your own soul. It was the violent and chaotic beginning of what Carl Jung called individuation, the sacred journey of a lifetime. It is the path you must walk to stop seeking completion in the fractured mirrors of other people and begin the slow, deliberate work of becoming a whole, integrated individual on your own. The wound you have been nursing for so long was not the end of your story. It was the starting point. It was the map, the compass, and the painful invitation to begin the only journey that truly matters. The journey back to yourself. The ultimate healing, you see, does not come from finally finding the right person who will never leave, who will never fail you. That is the old fantasy, the one that led you into the desert. The true healing comes from cultivating the courage to fully and unconditionally belong to yourself. It is the quiet, daily practice of standing in the truth of your own story, with all its scars and all its beauty, and not turning away. It is the act of learning to hold your own broken pieces with a tenderness and compassion that you once begged for from others. It is the slow transformation of the hollow ache of loneliness, which once felt like a punishment, into the sacred, solid ground of a home built within. A home that no one can take from you. A sanctuary where you are always seen, always valued, and always, finally, enough. This wound is not your identity. It is a guide. But learning to read the map it has drawn across your life, that is a different journey. And it does not happen here. We have put together a short guide to help you name the architecture of your own pain. It is not about solutions. It is about clarity. A first, honest breath after holding it for a lifetime. It's free. The link is in the description.